Recording in
Hi, I'm Councillor Dominique O'Rourke, and I'm one of the Ward 6 City Councillors here in Guelph. I just wanted to do a quick budget recap video for you because Councillor Chu and we held a town hall session at the beginning of November. We had a lot of email from concerned citizens, which I understand completely. We had a delegation night at council where people came to council to make some budget requests. And then we also had a workshop with our city staff on the 22nd of November to see where we could find some compressions in the budget. And then we just had our meeting yesterday for the budget. So I'm just going to share my screen here for a sec and give you a little understanding of what happened yesterday. All right. So hopefully you can see my screen now. This is what was originally proposed in the budget. So here in the tax levy city portion, this is the controllable expenses that the city can control. And 2% of that is for infrastructure. So a major pressure on the city is the rising cost of infrastructure. So we're subject to, in all of our construction projects, the construction price index, and that's up about 8%. So this 10%, 10.3 that was really presented actually pushes out $690 million of capital projects out past the 4-year mark so that we can really focus on what is essential. And in Ward 6, some of those things are the addition of a center turn lane up Gordon Street. It will be in part construction of the rec center. So there's a lot of capital works taking place in this area, and definitely downtown. It is the oversizing of pipes. And a lot of these things are required in order for the city to grow. So that's what was our starting point. And what that starting point is, there's 2% there for infrastructure, as I said. And then the balance is really a lot of operational growth in order to be able to serve the city. That includes more paramedics, which people feel is pretty critically important. So that's where our focus was yesterday, though, because that's the piece where we have the most control. The next piece here where you see tax levy, local board, and shared services, that 1.89 or 1.98, that is the Guelph Public Library, Guelph Police, the Elliott Long-Term Care. It is the Grand River Conservation Authority. These are outside boards where the city has an obligation for either partial or total payment. A big part of this number here was a $7 million increase in Guelph Police services. So that section, the city can't say no to those budgets, and if we do, there tend to be arbitration boards that will then side with the organization that set its budget. And in the case of Guelph Police, they did have a KPMG report that showed the number of officers that they needed in order to keep up with the pace of the population and the complexity of some of their operations. So that's what was driving this almost 2% here, significant increase in budget from Guelph Police. So this third piece, provincial housing, homelessness, and hospital. There's a full $4 million there for Wellington County to look after because they are our social service provider. So they set a budget, we pay 90% of it. They're the administrator for that. And then the city of Guelph, we do ambulance for all of Wellington County as well. And that is decided by the province, and that's been the case for decades. So for provincial housing, that is the cost of provincial legislation that leaves us with a $227 million shortfall on capital for growth over 10 years. So that is Bill 23, and it's very problematic for municipalities. It means that when developers build a new subdivision, they pay less now for the capital costs of that growth. They pay less for sidewalks, sewers, those types of things. There's a number of exemptions that were introduced, and also there's a phasing in of those development charges. And the city can't run a deficit. So we have property taxes, we have grants from other levels of government, and we have user fees. So you're seeing some rate increase there due to provincial policies. The other piece that you're seeing is Wellington County, that administers our social services, has a $4 million increase in order to look after shelters, and there's a need for more shelters in the city. We've seen a doubling of encampments. They also do some rent supplements, and they do subsidized housing, and so we know the need there is great. The other piece that you see here is hospital. So the city of Guelph has to pay 10% of any capital projects at the hospital, even though it's a provincial responsibility. We have a $750,000 a year commitment to Guelph General to help pay for that new neonatal, special needs nursery, special care nursery. Also an expansion of the ER and some mental health beds. So that's what you're seeing here. So through all these conversations and the counselors were digging deep into the budget, I promised you that I would work hard to bring that number down, and I have, and I'll tell you in a minute how we did that. So during yesterday's budget meeting, these are the things that I brought forward. So Councillor Goller wanted to help fund physician recruitment, which I supported. He wanted that funded through the tax base, and I moved to have that funded through reserves, and so that doesn't increase the cost of the tax levy. I also had an amendment so that on an ongoing basis, our internal auditors are looking at value for money through our departments, because every time we get to budget, we're looking what those expansions are, and we're not focused on what the operations are, and that is a $500 million operating budget. So I brought forward successfully a motion to bring forward some value for money audits, 2 per year, to really be looking deep in the operations. That are there projects that continue to be funded that are over? Are there services we shouldn't be offering anymore? And so that passed unanimously, and that was my motion. I also supported the mayor's health and safety motion on wellness checks in encampments, and that will be funded through reserves as well. And so it's not an addition to the tax levy. And one thing that made a big difference in terms of the city portion of the tax levy is Councillor Gibson brought forward a motion to push all the new hires out by 6 months. And so I seconded that motion, which passed, and that brought down the city portion quite a bit. I also supported that same motion to phase in the library positions. And so in the next chart, I'm going to show you that local board and shared services comes down a little bit for you as well. In terms of what we could cut within the city, I had a motion to cut digital transit signs. So the plan was to expand digital signage to 100 of the busiest bus stops in the city. And that project was really ballooning. It used to be in the neighborhood of 2 million. It was going to be more than 6 million over the next 10 years. And it came with considerable operating costs. So I moved to cut that entirely, and that passed. So that will have a saving year over year in terms of costs that we have avoided. So I told you I was going to dig, and I sure did. The other thing is I supported a 50% cut for the mayor's council and training budget. I also supported, this was Councillor Billings' motion, to support the hospital, but to pay for that through reserves as well. And so reserves are our savings account. We cannot raid them too much. We are drawing heavily on reserves in order to continue the capital projects that we've planned, but I supported her motion so that this provincial housing and homelessness and hospital piece could come down for you a little bit. I supported Councillor Caton's motion to look at could we have a project that would freeze interest and penalties on fines for lapsed property taxes. We don't currently have a big issue with that, but I think for people who are in the lowest income bracket, we need to be thinking about that. And then another motion that I had that brought the tax levy down significantly is we take funds from operating and we shift them to reserves. So this was a bit controversial, but we have a $500,000 transfer that goes into the affordable housing reserve. And this reserve was created so that when an affordable housing project took place in the city, a group or the proponent could come to council and ask for some of those funds to help offset their development charges on their building, right, which are considerable. Since then, the province, Bill 23, has removed development charges for affordable housing projects. And so the savings in terms of what that, cost of development is are way more than what we ever had in the affordable housing reserve. So after Bill 23, our staff actually said, you don't need this reserve anymore because you're doing it already through these exemptions. So what I wanted to do is to leave a tiny bit in that affordable housing reserve. So I've left $100,000 because sometimes a group that wants to build affordable housing, they need to show other levels of government that there is a city contribution. So that's the number one. The number two is if there was a big affordable housing development that came to council, we could still pull from reserves. We could still find the money somewhere else, but without taking $400,000 of operating in 2024. So that was my motion to do that. And that passed. And so it took $400,000 out of this year's operating budget. So it helps a little bit. It doesn't solve the problem completely, but I was trying to make some strategic cuts where it makes sense and where we still have some room to maneuver. I supported a 50% cut to bicentennial celebrations. I think we can still have a great bicentennial, but we should have some kind of budget in mind. And then the larger item that I moved was about transit. So I tabled a motion to look at what would be involved if we did our transit expansion over 15 to 17 years instead of over 13. And that would have had significant cuts. So I could tell clearly around the table, there wasn't a lot of support for that. It would have meant not moving forward on the Sunday bus service. And I hear from a lot of students and I hear from a lot of business owners, they end up having to pay, a student their Uber back home on Sunday evenings. It would mean we wouldn't progress as quickly on some crosstown services. And so I withdrew that motion, and here's where we ended up. So I'm just going to click over here. I'm going to hope it works. So here's where we ended up. Those reductions, Councillor Gibson's, mine, Councillor Billings, those reductions ended up with a reduction of almost of a full percent on the tax levy part. The phasing out of or 50% phase in of what the library's staffing requests were brought the local board and shared services down slightly, very slightly. And then the tax levy, provincial housing, homelessness, and hospital, Wellington County came back and said they could probably compress $1 million, shift it out, find it from somewhere else. And also funding the hospital through the reserve brought that number down significantly. So that's how we ended up at 8.52 from a 10.32. Some of the things we've shifted out, though, shift to other years. And so while this is a multi-year budget, I'm going to be just as laser focused on budgets in the next several years, because in my opinion, they are still too high. I promised I would work hard. I have. I will continue to do so. And I just wanted to give you some clarity around what happened yesterday. I also want to say that there's a lot of value in this year's budget. So we will continue with the transit expansion. We are continuing to build the South End Rec Center, which will have significant operating costs when it opens, but we've been waiting for 20 years for that. We will have the Gordon Street improvements, which are critically important for road safety on Gordon. We will see the construction of Oran Reed Park, which has also been delayed by probably 15 years. So I am happy to talk to you about any aspect of the budget, and you have an open door. I was sharing information about the budget in my newsletter, and more than 630 people opened that mid-month update. So if you don't already get my newsletter, please let me know and I will be happy to add you. You can reach me at dominique.o'rourke@guelph.ca. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for reaching out. We are absolutely listening and we work hard for you every day.